Growing up, my dad was a Marine. He served 3 years, was in Vietnam, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, 67 to 68. And most of my growing up years, the stories he told were hilarious. You know, he was the typical corporal antics. And so my sister and I grew up with that tradition and all the stories about the Marine Corps. And when I was 16, my grandmother had asked me to help her with the family genealogy. And she said, you know, we're related to William Tecumseh Sherman. So I went, 1987, there's no internet. So I went to the library, checked out a book, our small little library, and it was Sherman's March to the Sea, which had nothing to do with his history. But I was a kid who wasn't big into reading or into history necessarily, but I devoured that book and was fascinated with military history and became a huge Civil War buff and subscribed to Civil War Times Illustrated. And that combined with, my dad having been a Marine just led me to look more closely at becoming a Marine. So I started talking about it, and he said, not only no, but heck no. No daughter of mine's going in the Marine Corps. And so I just put that on the back burner, went to college, and I was getting ready to graduate, and Desert Storm kicked off, and I sat and watched, that unfold on CNN like the rest of America, and was like, I knew that was it. I was going in the Marine Corps. So I went to my dad and said, I'm going in. I had already talked to a recruiter. I was all set to sign the papers, and he said, look, if you're going to go in, at least go in as an officer. So the agreement was I would go talk to the officer selection officer, which I did, and the rest is history. I guess it was before when we were talking about the officer versus enlisted, and I was out a little bit older than, obviously 20, he sat me down and we watched Full Metal Jacket because he was trying to show me what Marine Corps boot camp was going to be like and try to talk me out of it. And the whole time I just kept saying, okay, all right, yeah, okay. It didn't change my mind or affect me, but yeah, it was, that was his attempt at trying to make me realize, one, what it was going to be about and maybe change my mind. It wasn't obvious that I would have ever made it through OCS. I think everybody thought I was going to not graduate. In fact, my DIs didn't think I was going to graduate. In the first couple of weeks, I was one of the ones they checked off as you're going home. Because for the Marine Corps, when you go to OCS, it's not a guarantee that you're going to finish and become an officer. So you have to make it through OCS, graduate, and then accept the commission, and get sworn in as a second lieutenant. So it wasn't obvious that I was going to even make it through the first couple of weeks. But I paid attention, and I was put in charge of the platoon, I guess in week number 2, and I succeeded in not screwing anything up. And I remember Gunny came up behind me. I was standing waiting in some line for somewhere, and she came up and got in my ear and said, Sweezey, I don't know where that came from. I was going to send you home, but now you're going to graduate. But I'm going to stay on you every second of every day, and I'm going to push you. And she did, and she taught me so much. I graduated in August, and then I was actually sworn in May. So it was a few months before I actually became a second lieutenant. And then went to the basic school, which is 6 months. That's in Quantico. And then from there, I went to Motor T school, and then to my first platoon at Camp Lejeune. I, got out. At that time, it was the Clinton, the drawdown. Like I said, I got out. I didn't go in the reserves because I had some health things that I had to get fixed, and then had a couple surgeries. Got a master's in history, and I have a significant broken time. I was fully discharged in 1998 at IRR, and then went to school, got my master's in history, and then Iraq and Afghanistan kicked off, and I had heard about prior service recruiters and people that had broken time they were bringing back in to serve, and so I talked to somebody, and they ominous dominus, actually they wiped away my discharge, which was weird. So my broken time was about 5 years between the time I fully got out and when I re-affiliated. Obviously after 9/11, like most Americans, there was a need deep inside, especially, being a former Marine, to do something. And when I realized that that was a possibility, I reaffiliated. There was a unit actually in Washington, D.C., 4th Civil Affairs Group. I knew nothing about civil affairs. I didn't know what they did, who they were, but they were getting ready to deploy to Iraq. And they said, if you're cool with that, we'll take you. And so I joined that unit and started to train, and went from, having been out all the way to ramping up for a deployment to Iraq. There's a lot of different things civil affairs does, and it's different in the Army than it is in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, they're generalists. And so really what you end up doing is you're kind of that conduit between the military forces and the civilian population. The Marines had taken over, the Iraqi government had fallen, and there was nobody to take care of basic food, water, and things like that. So, I mean, you could really end up doing any number of things, but the focus is really on what's happening in the civilian population. You might move people out of the battle space to get them away from danger. You may help take care of food and water for them during or after a battle. You may be meeting with a governor one day, a sheikh. You could end up meeting with a contractor, a school teacher. There's a huge, wide gamut of things you can do, but really it's that conduit between the civilian population and the military. I started to realize, wow, there's a lot of things about the Iraqi culture that even the classes that I got and the training I got, there were a lot of things we missed and a lot of things we didn't understand. And it was really that experience that led me to study anthropology, because I recognized that there were some huge gaps in our understanding. So I get home and I started to work with some nonprofits. I started my own company, which ended up failing, but I started to bring in handicrafts and things that were made in women's small businesses. A couple of them were nonprofits in Afghanistan, and I had some in Indonesia, Turkey, other places that were trying to help women who were disadvantaged earn money. And so I started this company, and working with the NGOs, I went to Afghanistan, to Kabul for a few weeks with one of the NGOs, and so I saw the war from a different perspective, and it was just kind of all of those light bulbs that kept going off in my head that, wow, there's a lot of things we're missing. And working from the NGO perspective, seeing things, again, recognizing that there were a lot of things I didn't understand about working in other cultures. And I happened to, at SOCOM one day, to read a paper written by an anthropologist. And I'm like, this is what I want. This is the knowledge that I'm really looking for. So originally my focus was, I did my master's thesis on the Holocaust, and what I was moving towards studying and understanding is how trauma shaped society, recognizing that these huge traumatic events in history have very real cultural implications. And so then what does that mean? And I was looking at, originally was going to go back to Kabul, and I was going to focus on gender-based violence and how what that's done to the Afghan society. I had an NGO all lined up to work with. I was going to go over there and live in safe houses and research, and the security situation got bad. The school got nervous, the NGO got nervous, everybody kind of backed out, and that was the end of that. So I had to find a new focus. I had been looking at that time also, just in a completely different vein, all of the health issues that were affecting veterans coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan. We had my little unit of, there's 100 of us. There was a lot of cancer. I've buried a couple of friends since we've been home, several. Lots of autoimmune illnesses and things like that. So we were starting to notice that there were some real issues with vets coming back, whether it's the burn pits, the anthrax vaccines, what was happening. And so because I had done a lot of research in that kind of in that vein, I took that and used that as my dissertation focus. So I looked at how, what it means for a veteran to go from being this hard-charging, soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine, to, this transition of then having everything fall apart and you become a sick vet, and what that does mentally and physically and does to your life. So medical anthropology wasn't my focus, but I really ended up pulling a lot of that in, and that ended up being the focus of my dissertation. I went into business with 3 of my business partners are former Army Civil Affairs officers. We do a lot of subcontracting right now, mostly teaching CMO. In other countries, we are teaching, other militaries how to do civil affairs and what that means, and that whole civ-mil integration. We work on a number of contracts there, but we started a company called Intended Consequences Group, and really our mission is providing that knowledge-based research consultancy to help organizations who are working cross-culturally to do that in a way that's least disruptive to the local population, how you understand other cultures, but also, what it means to your workers, your employees, and their families who are working and living in these other places, because, culture shock is a real thing. And so we've kind of got this holistic focus.